So thank you all so much for joining. Welcome. My name is Brian Kilkelly. I'm the Chief Executive of the Landscape Research Group, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our meeting this afternoon, this evening, this morning, depending on what time zone you might be joining in. Apologies for the slightly late start. We're having some technical issues with our wonderful presenters who are actually calling us from their hotel room in Prague. So as always, hotel connections sometimes are a bit of a challenge. But you're in the Contested Landscapes event from Landscape Research Group, in case you're wondering what you've turned up in. And so thank you for signing up. Thank you for joining. We're looking forward to a great session today. So we're going to be joined by Dr. Matthew Rofe, who's from the University of South Wales, and Professor Ripmeester, who's from Brock University. The picture you might see on your screen of a man and a child is actually not them. It's it's actually Mike and his daughter. Just in case you were wondering, but they're having to kind of not use their camera, or use it as little as possible to make sure that we can actually hear them when they're presenting. Also delighted to introduce Richard White, who's from University of Bath Spa, Richard's joining us from Adelaide. So Richard, thanks, because you're joining us at midnight. So we appreciate you staying up so late to be able to join us. Also, we have Jenna Ashton, who's from the University of Manchester, also a contributor to this special issue, which we're going to be talking about. So just to let you know, we're going to be recording the session. We encourage you to have your camera on if you'd like to have your camera on. It's always great to see people's faces. But as we're recording, of course, if you don't want to be recorded, then just keep your camera off. In terms of questions and answers, there'll be opportunity towards the end of the presentations where we're going to go through all the questions and answers. So do have a think about what questions you have as you go along, and by all means pop them into the chat, and then we'll come back to those questions when we go through the questions and answers. I think that's in terms of practicalities is probably it. Emily, have I forgotten anything, I wonder?
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it.
Is that good? Excellent.
Matthew.
Fantastic. Right. Well, I shall hand over to Matthew and Mike. Hopefully their internet connection is going to be good enough for us to hear from them.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
if you can actually hear me.
Yep, we can hear you now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm Matthew Rofe, and I'm here with my colleague and my mate, Mike Ripmeester. I'm from the University of South Australia. Mike's from Brock University in Canada. We'll talk a little bit more about the places that we're from. Emily, you were going to be sharing our slides. Thank you. So could we bring them up now, please? So to everyone, thank you for taking the time to come and hear about the special issue we've got coming out. We do apologise. Mike and I are currently at a heritage conference in Prague, and we are having some difficulties with our internet stability. So look, if we freeze, chat amongst yourselves, essentially. So look, to get into this, I'm Matthew Rofe, Michael Ripmeester, from this unit called Unit, which is an extremely diverse unit at the University of South Australia. I'm trained as an urban cultural geographer, and I just get Mike to let you know that he is here.
Hi, I'm Mike Ripmeester. I am in the Department of Geography and Tourism Studies at Brock University. I'm trained as a historical and cultural geographer.
Yep. So the special issue, which is kindly being published by Landscape Research Journal, is on contested landscapes, and quite unsurprising, as geographers, both Mike and I are deeply and intimately interested in the human landscape, its meanings, and its contestations. What you can see here on your slides are, obviously the central image which advertised this session, but also underneath the UniSA logo, this is the Great War Memorial, which is to the First World War in South Australia. Quite striking feature right in the centre of Adelaide. Richard White who, as Brian said, is currently in Adelaide, would be quite familiar with this now. And on the right is a statue to
Private Alexander Watson, who died in a battle where the Canadian forces went in to root out Métis and Indigenous persons from land that they were claiming was theirs and shouldn't be part of the new Confederation of Canada. The monument's been standing there since 1886, and like a symbol of continued colonial trauma against Indigenous peoples. More importantly, it featured in a movement called Every Child Matters when the unmarked graves of Indigenous children were found around Indigenous residential schools across Canada. So it's been in the news a fair bit lately, and they're still sort of working on what to do with this.
Yeah. Emily, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so starting out, this is an aerial view down onto North Terrace in the government materials present that if you are a visitor to the city of Adelaide, you can actually gain an understanding and an insight, a sense of place, if you will, in this area about not just the CBD of Adelaide, but its history of the entire state. Next slide, please. Now, Mike and I have been talking over a number of years about how with our HDR, our high degree research candidates, we're often saying, make sure that your literature is contemporaneous and up to date. So we're going to break our own rules here, and we're going to reach back to this seminal work by Lewis in 1979 in meetings, the geography of the interpretation of ordinary landscapes, because we feel that this, certainly in geography, was a key moment. And this quote encapsulates so much about how we perceive the human landscape. So it is a place that reveals cultural warts and blemishes, that they are publicly on display. And we feel that obviously that last part of it, for people that wish to seek out those cultures, and like was saying, with towards ours, Australia and Canada, the notion about what does our landscape remember, what does it forget, and the operation of power around that is very, very critical to us. Could you just go to the next slide, please? And Emily.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know this was here.
Yeah, it's here.
This is St. Catharines, Ontario, and it's a small city, industrial past, about 136,000 people. And one of the things that we are increasingly aware of and that we are increasingly talking about is that this is the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples.
Just next slide, just click there, please, Emily.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So we are trying harder to remember that, but in remembering this, we are also thinking about the weird juxtaposition of saying we honor this and we remember this with monuments and other sort of public memories that suggest and sort of our commitments to actions that were absolutely abhorrent and tragic and genocidal in all kinds of ways. So it's a weird sort of juxtaposition. And so the work that we're doing is trying to figure out, well, how does this work? And how do we understand these commitments? But then also, how might we, and Matthew will share more about this near the end, is to think about how truth and reconciliation can be worked through sort of mnemonic devices, so that we're thinking about, well, we've got this, we've got the protests. How can we sort of imagine coupling these things so that we remember the tragedy, we remember the protests, and all of that becomes part of our understanding of who we are.
Next slide, please, Emily. We may have frozen.
We may,
Yeah.
no, I can see people moving.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. So this image is obviously an aerial shot of the city of Adelaide. Like St Catherine's, where Mike is from. Adelaide is it's a state capital, but it is one of the modest state capitals in Australia, and derided as a rather backwards place by those from Sydney and Melbourne. Founded in 1836 and meticulously planned by Colonel William Light. It is a beautiful, beautiful city. But next slide, please. We acknowledge, obviously, that this site, what place we call out now we refer to as Adelaide, are the traditional and unceded lands of the Kaurna people. And as Mike was saying, this juxtaposition that cities are built upon traditional lands, and Emily, could you just give one more click, please, really resonates for us with this comment by Porter and Yif Teshel. That cities are in Australia in post-colonial contexts, they are not just places, they are profound sites of displacement, erasure, and ongoing marginalisation. And it is interesting, if I could just give Adelaide can be referred to as a city of festivals. It has risen nationally and internationally as a festival. And one of the juxtaposition festival, which is right in the inner city, has appropriately, it recognises, it has an acknowledgement of country. And yet in the running of that event, and I've been doing some research around that event, Indigenous people, Kaurna people, are removed from the public spaces that event occupies for a 2-week period under public nuisance ordinance. So again, acknowledgement, truth telling, and in the safety, and I'm doing the in sanitizing and tradition still being removed. Could we go to the next slide, please?
I think we may have lost them. They might have dropped off.
Does look like it, doesn't it? Yeah, maybe let's give them a few seconds. They dropped out completely.
I think so.
Oh, time for us to do that dance thing.
We're back.
Hey!
Hi, sorry, sorry, everybody. As I said earlier, when we were kind of encountering this issue, this is the, notwithstanding the global world we live in now, this is a digital divide. So as landscape theorists, there's some kind of beauty in what we're being reminded of. So within that context of how Michael and I, we don't need to go back. How Michael and I were thinking and operating, we were coming at this very much as geographers. But in the development of the special issue, we took the approach of, rather than actually reaching out to targeted, colleagues and contributors and presenting a geographic take on this, we thought we would open the door and we would have a global call to both academics and practitioners, and basically to see where interest took us. I've got to actually say it's been an extremely exciting and a journey of co-learning for both of us, which I think we found really enjoyable. I would also say that the response we got to the open call was huge. If I remember correctly, we got something like 60 abstracts sent to us. And so what we did was we actually said, yes, we will proceed with a special issue of the journal with these papers. But then we didn't want to say no, thank you very much, to the other contributors. And so we do have an edited monograph with Springer that'll be coming out next year. And so we want to acknowledge that this is a topic which has obviously resonated with so many people.
And one of the things that we really wanted to think about and pursue in developing this and opening it up beyond just geography was also thinking about creating a network of scholars who are interested in this. And we found that we've got sort of an interesting collection of scholars and practitioners and artists who are really providing a remarkable set of ideas that come out in these papers in the special issue, but also that are coming in the book as well.
Yeah.
So we're very excited about that and sort of hope that this is the beginning of the development of an even broader network of people who are interested in this and are thinking about ways in which we can resolve the juxtapositions that we described earlier.
So in the forthcoming special issue, obviously there is a guest editorial introduction by Michael and myself, and we have the following papers. So being self-serving, I snuck one of my own papers in there, and conflict of interest. I actually I was not involved in any editorial.
It's very apt that when he starts talking about conflict of interest, the connection goes, doesn't
My
it?
the context of that, we have a paper by Kune, Schonwald, and Jenna, which looks at a site in San Diego, California. We have a paper by Richard White, who is with us, and ironically is in Adelaide. But he and I swapped sort of Europe for the Antipodes. We have a paper by Jenna Ashton. Jenna is with us, and we'll speak to that. We also have a paper by Garcia and Rice, which is focused on a Brazilian case study. So again, some early career researchers, some well-established mid-careers, and more old people like Mike and I, getting a bit long in the tooth now, and also a good global spread. And I think one of the fascinating things is having thrown open the door and said, we want to develop this network of scholarship across disciplines, and one that transcends the academy and the practitioner divide. The papers we got really started to push the boundaries about what is possible in thinking of contested land, memoryscapes, and this starts to bring me to the work by Richard and then Jenna, because there's a beautiful transition. So if I can characterize it, that my work is actually quite traditional urban cultural geography, and Richard and Jenna's papers really begin to push the frontiers of memoryscape landscape research into new and exciting experimental areas. And so it's been a lovely journey to be involved with them. Can I just go to the last slide for us? Thanks, Emily. Okay, so a couple of shout outs. Obviously we want to thank everyone who's joined us on this journey. It's been a journey which we sort of started pre-COVID, and it's been a long journey, but we believe it's a fruitful journey. And now that it's coming to fruition, we don't see this as an end. As Mike said, we see this as a beginning. We do want to also thank the Landscape Research Journal's editorial team, particularly Emma Waterton, and the professional staff. I've got to say, amazing, colleagues and amazing friends now. And so thank you to them. Mike can also want to thank the Landscape Research Group, obviously for backing the journal, but also providing us with a research grant, which is here. It's the virtue-based tested landscape management. And this paper
Just to let you know, we've lost audio, but let's give it a few seconds to see if it comes back.
I think we can make up our own praise though, can't we, Brian?
That's true, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you on behalf of the Landscape Research Group. It's great to hear how this work has unfolded. While we're doing shout outs and waiting for them to return, I want to also give a special mention to Zanna Matson. Zanna's been a fantastic behind the scenes at putting this whole event together, actually, and coordinating with Matthew and Mike and others to bring this about. So Zanna, if you're on the line, thank you very much for your hard work on this. Have we lost them completely, do you think, Emily, or are they just...
I think they might have dropped, but I think they were going over, so I could stop sharing and we could pass over to Richard, I believe.
Yeah, that sounds very wise.
That's okay for you, Richard?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll pick up there, yeah, hope that they manage to connect back in before we finish. So I'm just one of the contributors to this, and my article, my paper, was all about a project that I was doing in Bath. So I'm going to share screen now, and I've got a couple of slides just to take you through the sort of questions and issues broadly raised by the paper. Okay, so hopefully you can see that that slide there. So the thank you. So I came in. I basically I'm an artist. I work in at Bath University, but essentially my work is about walking, and I did a lot of work with using an approach to walking that's exploring contested landscapes, that's exploring memory, it's exploring the stories of sites and places and so on. And in particular, I'm interested in what you might call sort of uncomfortable heritage, I suppose. And I've been working on a very long project in Bath, exploring the way in which, with the legacies of slave ownership, the way in which the money that built Bath kind of surfaces in different ways. So some stories are told and some are not told. So in that kind of context of heritage, that tension between authorised heritage and all of the other different stories that are running. So when this call for papers came out, I was right in the kind of the thick of a project about the Bath Union Workhouse burial ground. So for people in the UK that are watching this, you're probably familiar with the story of the Union Workhouses. For those that are not, very, very briefly, in the 1830s, the government, after an inquiry, decided that the way in which the state looks after the poor should be brought into in a kind of a localised but central way, rather than it being scattered around the parishes. And part of that was very much about penalising the people who were poor, so that you were in a sense made an example of, so that those who ended up in the workhouse, it was like a punishment. And one of the punishments, kind of the ultimate punishment really, is that people were buried in unmarked graves. and what's coming to the surface around the country are these plots of land where there are large numbers of people who were buried there. So you get a burial register, but there is nothing to kind of show for it. So in Bath, and this is the image on the right of the screen there, that was the burial ground one dawn, early morning, low light there, and you can just about see some very strange lumps and bumps. And it's kind of in the kind of popular local knowledge that it was, there's something, there was ghosts there, or some people more, your grandmothers, your great grandmothers in there, but wasn't then part of the local telling of the story at all. So the official telling of the story was this was just a field, and the council cut the grass, but that was about it. And so we researched it, we got into the burial register, and we began this process just before COVID kicked in, but we had about 4 or 5 months of it, of gathering. First of all, it was me and 2 or 3 other people, and it kind of grew and grew and grew, walking to the sound of the workhouse bell, reading the names. And we did that on and off through COVID. We recorded it. I went out, people sent me their files, and I went out and did it myself and played it out using speakers. And the thing kind of, it became quite an experience. And essentially, the article explores that. It was a successful project in the sense that at the end of it, so if I go to my next slide, so there were different ways in which the site showed itself, if you like. So the base picture there that I've put that kind of set of other little pictures over is you could see the lines of the paths and the burials at the time of year when the daisies came up. It was the ground bore witness, and I was very interested in that. And some part of the article kind of explores that. And other parts of the article, I'm kind of exploring. There's a idea that Oliver Atelli talks about sites of memory, so that kind of Nora thing about sites of memory, but of reluctant sites of memory, so that there is memory there, but the authorities, or for whatever reason, it denies you're not allowed to go there and grieve. There's nothing where you can go and grieve there. You don't even know who's there, and so on. So kind of exploring that and trying to, in this case, get the local authority to get the kind of the people that looked at it. It's still sanctified ground, and getting people to kind of engage in that. I was also interested in kind of exploring how we, in a sense, not that kind of ghosts, but kind of that kind of the spectres of the place, that those stories are, why on earth did they want to punish people for being poor? What were the consequences of being punished? How did that kind of rattle out through? So, I'm coming up on my little slot of time. So the themes that I've got there on the right-hand side essentially was what I was exploring. And I found the work of Karen Till around acts of care in wounded places. I'll kind of explore that. So here you've got just going around the circle there. So there on the, see my cursor, here we are reading the names with the sound of the bell, the tolling of the bell. I kind of edited it. We managed to actually get, it was the workhouse bell. And I recorded that, edited that up like as a toll, we walked with that. We started to that idea of sort of putting name banners up, and there's a sort of central point. Again, long story there, don't have time to tell you that. At that central point, eventually, we've been doing some guerrilla planting of stuff, but also we got official permission to plant trees and bulbs. And there we are at the top right-hand corner planting them and really kind of engaging physically. And at one point, a local sort of folk group came out and played. It was when we got together after COVID, and it was a very, very kind of moving thing because we hadn't been together and they hadn't been together and loads of people had died, and the kind of people that were dying were the same kind of people that had been in the workhouse. There's all kinds of resonances in there, they came out and played for us. So we had a wake, kind of a poor requiem. So if you check out the article, it's much more coherent than me just rabbiting on quickly there. But it's certainly been able to write that up and focus it in. It has been a very useful experience for me. And just in passing, the comments about Aboriginal land in Australia and the way that kind of the official memory and the hidden memory and the reluctant heritage is kind of working. There's a whole load of stuff there. So I really do hope that this kind of continues and get an opportunity to kind of explore these ideas further, because it's a rich and important stuff that I think that we are collectively doing. So that I'm going to hand over to Jenna Ashton, who's going to tell you all about the work that she contributed to the special issue. I'm going to stop sharing right there.
That's great. Thanks so much, Richard. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so okie dokie. So hopefully that's got everyone's attention now. Bring a dog into the room. And so the first thing actually is that my dog is actually in the office doorway. So if she starts going for it, I might just have to quickly jump up and shut her out. So yeah, no, thanks so much. And yeah, Richard's work's really fascinating. So yeah, do dive into that. So my background is actually, I'm from a combined arts background, and I kind of ended up in critical heritage studies as a lecturer in heritage studies. And my work is all focused on community practices, community knowledge, community memory, and so on, and community economy. So that's sort of where my work sits. I'm also an arts practice researcher, so bringing in different methodologies and methods through arts practice work. So before I start then talking through the structure of the paper, so I'm going to introduce each of the sections and what I'm trying to do in each of those sections. I just want to offer some trigger warnings. So in the presentation, I will be referring to war, killings and sexual violence. I won't be going into descriptions, but there will be mentions of these things. Also, in the written paper, I use the Albanian pronunciation of Kosovo, which is Kosovo. But for this presentation, I'll just use Kosovo because I think that's what most people probably on the call are quite used to hearing. So yes, first, just to thank Matt and Mike for accepting the paper into the special issue and for their really thoughtful and caring editorial approach, especially with this kind of material, kind of material of this nature. So the paper then offers an autoethnographic storytelling and analysis, considering what multi-species framing can offer post-war memorialization discourse and practice. So during 2019, I undertook initial scoping and consultation around the potential of a new museum or memorial site for post-war Kosovo. The aim of that new site was to encourage reflection and peace building and action around human rights. In Kosovo, there are multiple and conflicting memorialization practices enacted by war veterans, politicians, mourning widows and mothers, activists and survivors. And these all take different forms, from statues to protests, oral histories and curatorial interventions. And of course, as in all wars, the physical landscape of Kosovo is the site of crime and resistance, mythologizing and denial. But amidst the human memorial activity live the stray dogs of Pristina. So the dogs activated my attentiveness to the potential of a living landscape as a site of multi-species inquiry for rethinking the processes of memorialization and heritage making. So key multi-species scholarship engaged with through the paper includes the work of Donna Haraway, Deborah Bird-Rose, Thomas van der Ren, Anna Singh, and Jennifer Walsh and Jodie Ennell. So the paper is crafted into 5 sections. The first section is post-war memorialisation in Kosovo. So here I outline the context of the Kosovo War, an ethnic cleansing of Albanians enacted between 1998 and 99 within the wider Yugoslav wars of 1991 to 2001, led by the Serbian Milosevic regime. In Kosovo, 13,500 people were killed, approximately were killed or went missing during the conflict. Around 20,000 women and girls were raped, and thousands of people remain missing, with multiple mass graves uncovered over the last 2 decades. So in 2019, I had been invited by the Bugievski Family Foundation to undertake a consultation with heritage and cultural professionals around the potential of this new post-war museum of memory, peace and human rights. The Bugievskis, that's Sandra, Johanna and Fatos, were child survivors of their family's massacre in Podjeva, a village just outside of the main city, Pristina. They were among the 3,000 Kosovo refugees that came to Manchester in the UK in 1999. The aim of their new museum would be to evolve previous exhibition work led by the family and by Manchester-based UK curator James Walmsley. And in the paper, I put the relevant links to the information around the Bugievskis. So Saranda went to Manchester Met University. She ended up doing a degree in art, trained as an artist, but now she's actually the Deputy Prime Minister in Kosovo. So a really incredible journey for Saranda. So I was invited to Kosovo in response to the work that I was doing in Manchester at the time with international and refugee women artists that explored conflict, displacement and trauma, and the work seemed to resonate with the aims of the Bugievski project. So within critical heritage studies, then we're thinking about heritage and how it tries to understand, we're trying to explore and understand how the social and political phenomena of heritage and identity works within society. So it's what it does within society, to quote Laura Jane Smith. My conversations with heritage and cultural professionals in Kosovo specifically concerned global memorial museums and memorialization practices, post-war heritage making in the context of Kosovo. And so in that first section, I sort of go through that and I describe some of that activity. In section 2 of the paper, which is titled Dogs, A New Perspective, I introduce the context of the dogs. So the dogs of Pristina are free roaming, yet rely on human care to survive. Admittedly, they had not been included in my planned approach for analysing memorial activities and practices in Kosovo. But as the complexity of the consultation became more evident, the movement of the dogs in the city shifted from my periphery to being of equal concern to my encounters with people. Dogs are also part of the story of struggle, of expression and construction of identity. There is a vast body of scholarship on animals in war and also as subjects of memorialization, but little on the post-war afterlives of animals, specifically in Kosovo, aside from journalistic reporting. So as these dogs came into view, so did the significance of landscape outside of museum walls. So landscape as a site of movement, displacement, atrocity, and resistance echoed in what I was encountering, but not yet understanding in the free roaming dogs in the city. So I began following the dogs, taking notes and images, exploring and analysing the patterns of care and coexistence. And I realised what I was witnessing was an animal-human entanglement as part of post-war healing. And for me, this demanded the arts of attentiveness to better understand the specifics of this example of different forms of life caught up in diverse relationships of knowing and living together. In the context of my post-war Kosovo consultation, focusing on entangled species resonated with the need to stay with the trouble, to quote Haraway, and to navigate this complexity. By and large, the stray dogs in Kosovo are written about as objects to be controlled, contained, and managed by the human populace. No one poses the question, how do the dogs make places? How do residents understand the lived stories of the dogs? How can lively ethnographies of these dogs be written? To paraphrase Haraway, I started to file dog stories in my notebooks. Oops, sorry, mouse is going a bit fast. There we go. So I'd like to, and this is a note I'd made in my notebook and I popped into the article. So I'd like to introduce you to the dogs of Pristina. They hang around near the cafes, the bars, the bins, in the shade of the unfinished church. The locals give them water, leave them food on street corners. They dig themselves holes in the ground to keep cool, to keep safe. They'll be walking alone or in pairs of 2 or 3, mischief, play, sleep, eat. This city of dogs keeps people curious, responsive, responsible. The third section, dogs in Kosovo. I'll just go back to spot. The third section, dogs in Kosovo, offers an overview of the current and historical discourses around dogs, including an analysis of very limited archival footage that I managed to find from 2005 and 2008. And I also give an overview of the CNVR program. So that's the capturing, neutering, vaccination and release program that's been running since 2017. And I also offer a reconsideration of Haraway's companion species manifesto in this context, and also of Walsh and Emmel's Zoopolis. The strays can be perceived as a plural grouping. I wanted to unpick the work that was being done by the stray within the landscape. What motivates the partners in this companionship, or this type of companionship? What are the moments and opportunities of exchange and sharing? In what spaces and times? What happens when the companion species of human and stray meet? And what is it doing for memorialization, for shaping queer, feminist, anti-racist futures of equality and equity? Living with stray dogs contributes to an ontological shift in the public imaginary of who and what has equitable participation in making spaces and places. The dream of Zoopolis is for animals, human and non-human, to find ways together to undo the violence of the city. In the fourth section, encounters in the city landscape, I argue that I take seriously the stray or free-ranging dogs as a companion species in the city, part of an urban ecology practicing care, repair and reciprocity. It is a form of collective public responsibility and respect that informs an ethos of post-war society, a so-called multi-species achievement. The stray dogs of Pristina continuously renegotiate their physical presence and meanings in and upon public space, shaping and influencing human psychological states as they do so. What follows in this section then is a selection of short storied encounters with the dogs of Pristina to engage meaningfully in writing lively ethnographies that draw us into conversation with a host of different ways of making sense of others' worlds. In doing so, I attempt a different kind of heritage making in post-war landscape that embraces space as stories so far. Space is always under construction, relations between. It is always in the process of being made. It is never finished, never closed, to quote Doreen Massey. These short storied encounters are titled Outside the Library, At Breakfast, To the Hotel, and At the Church. And the fifth section and conclusion, Landscape as Living Memorial, outlines the significance of the dogs and my multi-species approach for rethinking heritage making and memorialization practices in the post-war city landscape. The model of companion species that begins to emerge in Pristina is one of awkward cohabiting. It exists on the inter and intra-relating of fleshy, significant semiotic material being. Importantly, I've witnessed human society learning to be affected, so perhaps to understand and care a little differently. There are implications of this sharing and caring for post-war healing and a transitional society that is remaking its democracy and its lines of ethical and moral behaviours. Kosovo human citizens could remember and care with humans the way they are learning to care and remember with the stray dog citizens of Pristina. The landscape and attentiveness within it can be, and perhaps already is, the memorial for the disenfranchised, the struggling, connecting, sharing, repairing, remembering and witnessing. Landscapes hold a multiplicity of stories and knowledges outside of museum walls. It counters the static singular vision of monuments. The work that is being done through memorialization lays the ground for cultivating equitable and inclusive societies. In Kosovo, whose human memory, whose human heritage is an ongoing site of contestation. It is a political battle. I argue that paying attention to non-human actors in the landscape offers an alternative ethical framework for working through the complexity of trauma and loss and remaking shared worlds. This work is never applied, but always emergent. Arguably, heritage practitioners could spend less time with museum artifacts, buildings and statues and give time to supporting the flourishing of place-based living cultures in all their forms. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jenna, and thank you, Richard. Very fascinating presentations and content. And I'm just going to see whether or not Mike and Michael are back on the line if they want to take up the mantle again.
Can you Brian, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so okay, so I'm gonna go move over here on the and my phone. Okay, so now we're just on my phone.
Great.
Which
That sounds
is
good.
connected to
The same internet.
yeah, but it's also connected to my like roaming. So hopefully the two of us can sit here. I'll hold my phone and we can work on this together. I'm just trying to see if we can find, oh yeah, there we go. It might be best if I'm not sure I can see the chat. So if there are questions, perhaps it would be good if somebody could read them to us, and then we can try to answer them verbally.
I'll take care of that, no problem.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Just before we move to that, Brian and everybody, if you don't mind, Matthew here. Look, I just want to say two things. We were dropping out with the audio, so unfortunately we did miss quite a lot. But two things I want to say. Richard, we heard you mention that obviously, you know, you have a desire to continue in this project, and I want to say, obviously, with the support of the Landscape Research Group, yes, we're continuing this work, and it'd be wonderful to have you involved. Jenna, likewise yourself, and your comment, which we heard about, you know, something about our kind and careful editorialship. Thank you. You know, so to both of you, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to work with you, and you know, we would like that to continue into future. So let's throw it open to questions and comments.
Fantastic. So folks, if you have any questions, please do put your hand up or pop it into the chat, and I'll do my best to kind of manage all of those. But perhaps we've got one question that's come in the chat, which is from, and excuse me if I've pronounced your name incorrectly. It's from Atachong Tela. It's to Matthew and Mike. And Atachong says, when you say Adelaide was founded, how does the word founded sit within your exploration of colonized landscape?
Okay, sorry. So I'm going to pick that one up. I'm not sure if you're coming at this, my friend, from a semiotics point of view, but when I use the term founded, I'm using essentially a historic term which is used that denotes a presumably peaceful and logical transition. I'm sure you're aware that Australia was regarded as terra nullius, or the empty continent, which was overturned as part of the Mabo reconciliation case and land rights case. But the word founded is a gentle word that belies the violence of colonization and the forced displacement. So please don't think that in the use of that word that I, and in my research, are not cognizant of its political kind of connotations and narratives. Certainly are, and moving forward, engaging with technology in the process of truth telling is a critical part of my work individually and our work collectively.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. Achong, I don't know if you wanted to unmute and expand on your question, or whether you're happy with that answer. To by all means pop on your microphone and join in. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, sorry, you just broke up there a little bit, Brian, but I hope that you could hear my response. But and obviously, if there are questions that either Mike and I can't answer, you know, please, if people could email us, happy to engage in a dialogue, because that's what we're about.
Right.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got a question for you whilst we're waiting for more questions to come in. You mentioned, Matthew, early on that you wanted to kind of go beyond the kind of traditional geographic kind of analysis of contested landscapes. And I was just wondering what inspired you to kind of reach out more broadly to different audiences in order to do this piece of work.
That's a such a good question. It's deceptively easy to answer, but very, very rich. I can speak from my training, and in my training as a geographer, I was trained very much to be a disrespecter of disciplinary boundaries. And being Australian as well, I think that there is a bit of a vein, and of convict descent, I would add, there is a vein of scallywagism in myself, and complex issues, complex problems are never going to be resolved with a single disciplinary or professional approach. And so, you know, I have this catchphrase really, which is part of my praxis is I want to learn with and from people. And so logically, that says that doorways have to be open. And we have to be receptive to walking through different disciplinary and professional doorways and being receptive of other people walking through into our spaces. Mike, I just might throw to you as well.
Oh, thank you. One of the things that I think was important in my thinking about this, I mean, geographers have always been known as synthesizers. But one of the things that struck me some years ago already was reading the work of Doreen Massey, who said, you know, the thing that we really have to do, instead of tearing places apart to understand them, we have to put them together. And so thinking about things like collective memory, there's such rich sort of histories of scholarship and current scholarship in public memory, in history, in sociology, in politics, all over the place, across the social sciences and the humanities. So in all kinds of ways, this effort that we're pursuing here is our recognition that what we want to do is put places together rather than.
I just want to acknowledge that that's a much more coherent and scholarly response than just saying scallywags. You can see why I work with Mike.
I think both fit perfectly together. I can see why you guys are such a good pair working together. Thanks very much. Of course, it was a bit of a loaded question coming from the landscape research group, because of course we're huge fans of the transdisciplinary approach. But thank you, that's brilliant.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thanks, Brian.
Excellent. I have a question for Richard. Richard, I was really fascinated with that picture of the flowers coming up in the grass, and the patterns that flowers are making, and how they kind of told us something about, or gave us a clue as to what may have happened there before. And yeah. I'm just wondering, did you just spot that accidentally, or is it something that you were looking for?
Yeah, well, I suppose we spotted it because it wasn't accidental, because we were there, and then so I've learned a lot more about plants and things as part of that process, in fact. But we were asking, well, you know, so why those daisies come up there? You know, it's come up in lines, you know, so you could see the daisies were coming up in lines, and then the sort of creeping buttercup was coming up as well, and so it was just, you know, just kind of asked around, but you know, from completely a kind of common sense view of it, you'd say, well, look, that looks like a path, and that looks like a kind of a sort of empty area, and it was just strange at different times of year, in different ways, that field kind of, there was a voice there, you know, that whole idea of, you know, we've got to be listening for other ways, you know, it's not just in the kind of the hard records and the kind of the official records. You've got to find other ways of making a connection with that place, and that was one of the ways that we found in it. And in fact, the whole story of getting the developing it as encouraging it to become a wildflower meadow, which was where I kind of moved on from it. We got it to that stage, and then I thought that's what I need to move to the next thing, sort of thing. Was that, of course, it's never been sprayed, so it's never had any kind of weed killer on it. It's never had any kind of fertilizer or anything apart from, you know, the rich soil that's generated by human remains, you know, so it's just been mowed occasionally, and we found one solitary cowslip, and then the council came and cut the grass the following day and scalped it, and there was a huge outcry. You know, we found this little you know, cowslip that's kind of got there. And so then this guy that I was working with, he really methodically brought on these little cowslips, and then we guerrilla planted a whole lot more little cowslips, and so it kind of continued. Yeah, flowers tell a story, you know, and those stories are there. Beautiful. If only you can find a way of getting to the voices. You know, it's like that thing about you know, there's different kinds of memory, and we were talking about mnemonic places, and it's just finding a way of hearing it, of being sensitive to it.
Yeah, most definitely. It's very powerful, which almost makes me feel quite emotional, just seeing the picture and hearing the stories and just thinking about all that represents. In the same way as thinking about animals and the effect of animals and other creatures on these landscapes, like you were saying, Jenna, as well. And yeah, thinking about it from different perspectives and how animals are responding or influenced by these shifting landscapes, contested landscapes. And actually, Jenna, I was just curious to know, in your interactions with authorities there in Pristina, what do they think? Do you think you're absolutely crazy? Or do they think, or do they, you know, were they somehow, you know, appreciative?
Well, what was really great actually about having the opportunity to write this paper is that it forced me to go back and speak to, not physically go back, unfortunately, but, you know, conditionally go back and speak to the different sort of burgeoning animal rights organisations that are you know, current sort of emerging in Kosovo. And this is the interesting thing about war, I suppose, that is just awful, is that it kind of stops things. It stops that next stage of you know, so when we think about kind of animal rights in the UK, we go, oh yeah, there's been a kind of longevity of animal rights practices that have built up over time. When you have a war, it kills generations of people and also kills generations of practice. So Kosovo is a very young country, and Pristina is an incredibly young city. So actually, most of the people that are leading these initiatives now, and it's only come up really over the past sort of decade, because it won its independence in 2008. So it's the sort of young people that have grown up in that decade of independence that that are now leading things like animal rights issues, you know. So and they were incredibly sort of generous in my emailing. And actually, when I sent the article back to Animal Rights Kosovo, they really loved it. They really loved that it gave them a different perspective in thinking about how they can also talk and discuss the dogs in the landscape, but it also helped them to think about you know, yeah, what their work is as well, and to think about it more conceptually. And they're in the process at the moment of thinking about whether they can get it translated into Albanian, which is really cool. So yeah, so in terms of authorities, I think Saranda, so in terms of the Bugievskis, I think initially, because I was asking them about their perspectives on the dogs, and they were kind of a little bit bemused, I think. They were sort of a little bit like, oh, okay. But it also dawned on them that actually, yeah, the journalistic language around the dogs is mostly incredibly negative. But then you've also got this other sort of younger, kind of, you know, left of centre, sort of, you know, young people who are actually writing and thinking, trying to think differently about the dogs in terms of a kind of caring framework. And saying there's some, you know, incredible sort of feminist and human rights activists that I met physically and spoke to a lot when I was out there. So it's a really interesting melting pot of kind of older generations who still carry with them the kind of longer term memories of the war and you know, the kind of, yeah, sort of physical trauma of that. Then you have younger generations that were sort of young children under that, and who maybe were refugees who have now come back to the country and are now have also been engaged with as young people going to universities, say in Europe or in America, engaging with different approaches and different thoughts around animals in society, and they're bringing that knowledge back with them to Kosovo and to the city. So it's a really interesting, complex melding pot, and and obviously Kosovo and North Kosovo has been in the news just over the last couple of weeks, and kind of ongoing tensions with Serbia on the border. So yeah, so things are not completely settled, of course, but it's fascinating to see that how that evolves. Yeah,
wonderful. Thanks, Jenna. Brilliant. That adds a bit more flavor to it for sure. Matthew and Mike, just to let you know that Atin Chong has replied in the chat to say, thank you so much. Nice to recognize the politics of founded landscapes. So I think they appreciated your answer on that one.
Oh, yeah, a pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. So folks, for those of you on the call, last chance to ask any questions, do feel free to unmute or pop up your hand. Otherwise, we're going to be wrapping up the session. I'll hand back to Matthew and Mike for a kind of final word wrap up before we close this wonderful and very interesting session.
I think just the final thing for us is, look, again, thank you to the Landscape Research Group. Thank you to Landscape Journal, Research Journal, Richard, Jenna, a privilege. And thank you all for coming.
And just Matthew said, because I am also grateful for the attendance and for the attention, and for people sticking with us through our technical difficulties.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we would welcome email inquiries if people would like to contact us about the work we're doing, or if you're interested with it at the beginning of interest in about these things in sort of current fashion or something new and innovative, we're open, and we really would like to hear from you.
Yeah, I just want to add, if I can, just one more thanks, which is to Mike, because Mike is a wonderful friend, a wonderful colleague, and an absolute inspiration, for me. So, thanks, Mike.
Oh, what a good guy.
Excellent. All right, folks, let's give all of our speakers a big round of applause, and thank you all very much for coming and sharing with us this great work. And we look forward to the special edition coming out very soon. I also want to put a call out for some other future events that we've got coming up at the Landscape Research Group. We've got a field study to Dunkirk, which is coming up in October. So please check out our website for details of that one. We still have some places left on that field study, and we'd be delighted to have you come along and join us there in Dunkirk. Lots to learn there about the landscapes in Dunkirk, and you can imagine full of history and incredible lessons for us going forward. Dr. Ian Mell, one of our trustees, is going to be also running another session for us, talking about a special issue that's coming out on rethinking the green city. And that's going to be on the 13th of September. So tune in then, register then for that event. There'll be another great conversation, I think, about another special issue, which we've got coming up. So Emily, thanks for all your work as well in getting this session ready and working with all the speakers. And I think that's it. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks, Emily. Thank you, Brian.
Yes, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thanks all. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.